Chapter 3 The Letter from No One. The escape of the Brazil boa constructor earned Harry his longest ever punishment. By the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started, and Dudley had already broken his new scene camera, crushed his remote control airplane, and first time on his racing bike knocked down old Mrs. Fig, and she crossed Private Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's gang, who visited the house every single day. Pierce, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all big and stupid, but as Dudley was the biggest and stupid of the lot, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favorite sport, Harry hunting. This was why Harry spent so much time as possible out of the house, wandering around and thinking about the end of the holidays, where he could see a tiny ray of hope. When September came, he would be going off to secondary school, and for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be with Dudley, and had a place at Uncle Vernon's old school. Smell things. Pierce Focus was going there too. Harry, on the other hand, was going to the Stormwest High, the local comprehensive. Dudley thought this was very funny. They stuff Phil's head down the toilet first day at Stonewall, he told Harry. Want to come upstairs and practice? No thanks, said Harry. The poor toilets never had anything horrible as your head down it. It might be sick. Then he ran, before Dudley could work out what he said. One day in July, Aunt Petunia took Dudley to London to buy his new Smeltings uniform, leaving Harry and Mrs. Figgs. Mrs. Figgs wasn't bad as usual. It turned out she'd broken her leg tripping over one of our cats, and she didn't seem quite as fond of them as before. She let Harry watch television and gave him a bit of chocolate cake that tasted as though she had it for several years. That evening, Dudley paraded around the living room for the family in his brand new uniform. Smeating's boys were called Buster. They also carried knobbly sticks used for hitting each other while the teachers weren't looking. This was supposed to be good training for later life. As he looked at Dudley in his new knickerbockers, Uncle Vernon said gruffly that it was the proudest moment of his life. Aunt Petunia burst into tears and said she couldn't believe it was her little Duddekins. He looked so handsome and grown up. Harry didn't trust himself to speak. He thought two of his ribs might already have cracked from trying not to laugh. There was a horrible smell in the kitchen next morning when Harry went in for breakfast. It seemed to be coming from a large metal tub in the sink. He went to have a look. The tub was full of what looked like a dirty rag swimming in grey water. What's this? He asked Aunt Petunia. Her lips tightened as they always did if he had dared to ask questions. Your new school uniform, she said. Harry looked in the bowls again. Oh, he said, I didn't realize it had to be so wet. Don't be stupid, snapped Aunt Petunia. I'm dyeing some of Dudley's old things grey for you. It will look just like everyone else when I've finished. Harry seriously doubted this, but thought it be best not to argue. He sat down at the table and tried not to think about how he was going to look on his first day at Stonewall High. Like he was wearing bits of old elephant skin, probably. Dudley and Uncle Vernon came in, both with wrinkled noses because of the smell from Harry's new uniform. Uncle Vernon opened his newspaper as usual, and Dudley banged his smarting stick, which he carried everywhere. On the table, they heard the click of the letterbox and fluff of letters on the doormat. Get the post, Dudley, said Uncle Vernon from behind his paper. Make Harry get it. Get those posts, Harry. Make Dudley get it. Poke him with your smattings, sneak, bubbled Dudley. Harry judged the smelting stick and went to get the post. Three things lay on the doormat: a card from Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, who was holding on the ice of weight, a brown envelope that looked like a bill of a letter for Harry. Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart twinging like a giant electric band. No one ever in his whole life had written to him. Who would? He had no friends, no other relative. He didn't belong to library, so he'd never even got loose notes asking for book back. Yet here it was, a letter addressed so plainly there could be no mistake. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs. 4 Private Drive, Little Whinging Shirley. The envelope was thick and heavy, made of yellowish parchment, and the address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. Turning the envelope over, his hand trembling, Harry saw a purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms. A lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake surrounding a letter H. "Hurry up, boy!" shouted Uncle Vernon from the kitchen. "What are you looking? Going for the letter bombs?" He chuckled at his own joke. Harry went down to the kitchen stairs, staring at his letter. He handed Uncle Vernon the bill and the postcard, sat down, and slowly began to open the yellow envelope. Uncle Vernon ripped open the bill, snorted in disgust, and flipped over the postcard. "Marge see you," he informed it, and Petunia. "It's a funny whack." "Dad," said Dudley suddenly, "Dad, Harry's got something." Harry was on the point of unfolding his letter, which was writing on the same heavy parchment as the envelope, which it was jerked sharply out of his hand by Uncle Vernon. "That's mine," said Harry, trying to snatch it back. "Who'd be written to you?" sneered Uncle Vernon, shaking the letter open with one hand and glancing at it. His face went from red to green faster than a set of traffic lights. And it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was a gray sheet white of old porridge. "Petunia!" he gasped. Dudley tried to grab the letter to read it, but Uncle Vernon held it high, out of his reach. And Petunia took it curiously and read the first line. For a moment, it looked as though she might faint. She clenched her throat and made a choking noise. "Vernon! Oh my goodness, Vernon!" They stared at each other, seeming to forgotten that Harry and Dudley were still in the room. Dudley wasn't used to being ignored. He gave his father a sharp tap on the head with his smelting stick. "I want to read that letter," he said loudly. "I want to read it," said Harry furiously, "as it's mine." "Get out, both of you," croaked Uncle Vernon, stuffing his letter back inside its envelope. Harry didn't move. "I want my letter," he shouted. "Let me see it," demanded Dudley. "Out," roared Uncle Vernon, and he took up both Harry and Dudley by the scruff of their neck, and threw them into the hall, slamming the kitchen door behind them. Harry and Dudley promptly had a furious but silent fight over who would listen at the keyhole. Dudley won, so Harry, his glass dangling from one ear, lay flat on his stomach, tried to listen at the crack behind the floor. "Vernon," Uncle Aunt Petunia was saying in a quavering voice, "look at the address. How could they possibly know where he sleeps? You don't think they are watching the house?" "Watch? Spying. Might be following us," muttered Uncle Vernon widely. "But what should we do, Vernon? Should we write back? Tell them we don't want—" Harry could see Uncle Vernon's shiny black shoes prancing up and down the kitchen. "No," he said finally. "No, we will ignore it. If they don't get an answer, yes, that's the best. We won't do anything. But I'm not having one in the house, Petunia. Didn't we swear when we took him in we'd stamp out the dangerous nonsense?" That evening, when he got back from work, Uncle Vernon did he'd never done before. He visited Harry in his cupboard. "Where's my letter?" said Harry, the moment Uncle Vernon had squeezed through the door. "Who's written to me?" "No one. It was addressed to you by mistake," said Uncle Vernon shortly. "I have worn it." "It was not a mistake," said Harry angrily. "It had my cover on it." "Silence!" yelled Uncle Vernon, and a couple of spiders fell from the ceiling. He took a few breaths and then forced his face into a smile, which looked quite painful. Yes, Harry, about this covered. Your aunt and I have been thinking. You are really getting a bit for it. We think it might be nice if you move into Dudley's second bedroom." "Why?" said Harry. "Don't ask questions," snapped his uncle. "Take this stuff upstairs now." The Dudleys' house had 4 bedrooms, one for Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, one for visitors, usually Uncle Vernon's sister Marsh, one where Dudley slept, and one where Dudley kept all the toys and things that wouldn't fit into his first bedroom. It only took Harry one trip upstairs to move everything he owned from the cupboard to his room. He sat down on the bed and stared around him. Nearly everything in here was broken. The month-old scene camera was lying on the front of a small working tank Dudley had once driven over next door's dog. In the corner while Dudley's first favorite program had been cancelled, there was a large bird cage which had once held a parrot that Dudley had swapped at school for a real-life air rifle, which was on upstairs shelf with the end of vent because Dudley had sat on it. Other shelves were full of books. There were only things in the room that looked as though they'd never been touched. From downstairs came the sound of Dudley bawling at his mother. "I don't want him in there. I need the room. Make him get out." Harry sighed and stretched out of the bed. Yesterday he had given anything to be up here. Today he'd rather be back in his cupboard with that letter than up here without it. Next morning at breakfast, everyone was rather quiet. Dudley was in a shock. He screamed, while his father whisked his matting stick, been sick on purpose, kicked his mother, and drawn his tortoise through the greenhouse roof, and he still didn't have his loom back. Harry was thinking that this time yesterday and bitterly wishing he'd opened the letter in the hole. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia kept looking at each other darkly. When the post arrived, Uncle Vernon, who seemed to be trying to be nice to Harry, made Dudley go and get it. They heard him banging things with his matting stick all the way down the hall. Then he shouted, "There's another one! Mr. H. Potter, the smallest loom, for a private drive." With a startled cry, Uncle Vernon leapt from his seat and ran down the hall, Harry right behind him. Uncle Vernon had to wrestle Dudley to the ground to get the letter from him, which was made difficult by the fact Harry had grabbed Uncle Vernon around the neck from behind. After a minute of confused fighting in which everyone got hit a lot by the smelting stick, Uncle Vernon started off, gasping for breath, with Harry's letter crunched in his hand. "Go to your cupboard, your bedroom," he wheezed at Harry. "Dudley, go, just go." Harry walked round and round his new room. Someone knew that he had moved out of his cupboard, and they seemed to know he hadn't received his first letter. Surely that meant they'd tried again, and this time he'd make sure they didn't fall. He had a plan. They'll repair that alarm clock rang at 6 o'clock the next morning. Harry turned it off quickly and dressed silently. He mustn't wake the Dursleys. He stormed downstairs without turning on any of the lights. He was going to wait for the postman on the corner of Private Drive and get the letter for number 4 first. his heart hammered as he crept across the dark hall towards the front door. Ah! Harry leaped into the air. He turned something big and squishy on the doormat. Something alive. Harry clicked on upstairs, and to his horror, Harry realized that the big squishy something had been his uncle's face. Uncle Vernon had been lying at the foot of the front door in a sleeping bag. Clearly making sure at the foot of the front door in a sleeping bag. Clearly making sure that Harry didn't do exactly what he'd been trying to do. He shouted at Harry for about half an hour, and then he told him to go and make a cup of tea. Harry stubbed miserably and into the kitchen, and by the time he got back, the post had arrived right into Uncle Vernon's lap. Harry could see 3 letters addressed in green ink. "I want," he began, but Uncle Vernon was tearing the letters into pieces before his eyes. Uncle Vernon didn't go to work that day. He stayed at home and nailed up the letterbox. "See," he explained to Aunt Petunia through the mouthful of nails. "If they can't deliver them, they will just give up." "I'm not sure that will work, Vernon." "Oh, those people's minds work in strange ways, Petunia. They're not like you and me," said Uncle Vernon, trying to knock in a nail with a piece of fruitcake Aunt Petunia had just brought him. On Friday, no fewer than 12 letters arrived for Harry. As they couldn't go through the letterbox, they had been pushed under the door, slid through the sides, and a few even burst through the small window in the downstairs toilet. Uncle Vernon stayed at home again. After burning all the letters, he got out a hammer and nail and boarded up the crack around the front and back door so no one could go out. He hummed the tiptoe through the tulips as he walked and jumped at the small noise. On Saturday, things began to get out of hand. 24 letters to Harry found their ways into house, lured up and hidden inside each of the 12 dozen eggs that their very confused milkman had handed Aunt Petunia through the living room window. While Uncle Vernon made furious telephone calls to the post office and daily tried to find someone to complain to, Aunt Petunia shredded the letter in her food mixer. "Who on earth wants to talk to you this badly?" Dudley asked Harry in amazement. On Sunday morning, Uncle Vernon sat down at the breakfast table looking tired and rather ill, but happy. "No post on Sundays," he reminded them happily as he spread marmalade on his newspaper. "No darn news letters today." Something came whizzing down the kitchen chimney as he spoke and caught him sharply on the back of the head. Next moment, 30 or 40 letters came panting out of the fireplace like burlap. The Dudleys balked, but Harry leaped into the air trying to catch one. "Out! Out!" Uncle Vernon seized Harry around the waist and drew him into the hall. When Aunt Petunia and Dudley had run out with their arms over their face, Uncle Vernon slammed the door shut. They could hear the letters still streaming into the room, bouncing off the walls and floor. "That does it," said Uncle Vernon, trying to speak calmly, but pulling great froth out of his mustache at the same time. "I want you all back in here 5 minutes, ready to leave. We're going away. Just pack some clothes. No arguments." He looked so dangerous with half of his mustache missing that no one dared arguing. 10 minutes later they had wedged their way through the boarded-up doors and were in the car, speeding toward the motorway. Dudley was sniffing in the back seat. His father had hit him around the head for holding them up while he tried to pack his television, video, and computer in his sport bag. They drove and they drove. Even Aunt Petunia didn't dare ask where they were going. Every now and then Uncle Vernon would ask, I take a sharp turning and drive in the opposite direction for a while. Shake 'em up, shake 'em up. He would murmur wherever he did this. They didn't stop to eat or drink all day, but Nightfall Dudley were howling. He'd never had such a bad day in his life. He was hungry, he'd missed 5 television programs he'd wanted to see, and he'd never gone so long without blowing up an alien on his computer. Uncle Vernon stopped at last outside a gloomy-looking hotel on the outskirts of the big city. Dudley and Harry shared a room with twin beds and damp dusty sheets. Dudley snored, but Harry stayed awake, sitting on the window sill, staring down at the light of passing cars and wondering. They ate stale cornflakes and cold tinned tomatoes on toast on breakfast next day. They had just finished when the owner of the hotel came over to their table. Excuse me, but is one of Mr. H. Potter? I only got about an addressed 100 of those at the front desk. She held up a letter so they could read the green ink address. Mr. H. Potter, room 17, Review Hotel, Cockworth. Harry made a grab for the letter, but Uncle Vernon knocked his head out of the way. The woman stared. I will take them, said Uncle Vernon, standing up quickly and following her from the dining room. Wouldn't it be better just to go home, dear? Aunt Petunia suggested timidly. Hours later, but Uncle Vernon didn't seem to hear her. Exactly what he was looking for, none of them knew. He drove them into the middle of the forest, got out, looked around, shook his head, got back in the car, and off they went again. The same things happened in the middle of the flogged field, halfway across the station bridge, and at the top of a multi-story car park. Dudley's gone mad. Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he? Dudley asked Aunt Petunia dully late that afternoon. Uncle Vernon had parked at the coast, locked them all inside the car, and disappeared. It started to rain. Great drops beat on the roof of the car. Dudley shivered. It's Monday, he told his mother. The great Humberloot on tonight. I want to stay somewhere with on television. Monday. This reminded Harry of something. If it was not Monday, and you could certainly count on Dudley to know the days of the week because of television, then tomorrow, Tuesday, was Harry's 11th birth. Of course, his birthday was never exactly fun. Last year, the Dudleys had given him a coat hanger and a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks. Still, you worked 11 all day. Uncle Vernon were back in and he was smiling. He was also carrying a long thin package and didn't answer Aunt Petunia when she asked what he'd brought. Found the perfect place, he said. Come on, everyone, out. It was very cold outside the car. Uncle Vernon was pointing at what looked like a large rock way out of the sea. Perched on top of the rock was a most miserable little shark you could imagine. One thing was certain, there was no television in there. Storm forecast for tonight, said Uncle Vernon gleefully, clapping his hands together, and this gentleman kindly agreed to lend us his boat. A toothless old man came ambling them, pointing with a rather wicked grin at an old rowing boat bubbling in on lion grey water below them. I've already got us some rations, said Uncle Vernon, so on aboard. It was freezing in the boat. Icy seas sprayed and rain crept down their necks, and a chilly wind whipped their faces. After what seemed like an hour, they reached the rock, where Uncle Vernon slipped and sliding led the way back into the broken-down houses. The inside was horrible. It smelled strongly like seaweed. The wind whistled through the gap in the wood walls, and the fireplace was damp and empty. There were only two looms. Uncle Vernon's reflection turned out to be a packet of crisps each other, and 4 bananas. He tried to start a fire, but empty crisp packet just smoked and shivered up. Could do with some of those letters now, eh? He said cheerfully. He was in a very good mood. Obviously, he thought nobody would stand a chance of reaching them here in the storm to deliver post. Harry proudly agreed. Though that thought don't cheer him up at all. As night fell, the promised storm blew up around them. Spray from all the height waves splattered the walls of the hut, and fierce winds rattled the filthy windows. Aunt Petunia found a few mouldy blankets in the second room and made up a bed for Dudley on a moth-eaten sofa. She and Uncle Vernon went off to the lumpy bed next door, and Harry was left to find the softest bit of floor he could and curled up under the thinnest, most ragged blanket. The storm raged more and more furiously as the night went on. Harry couldn't sleep. He shivered and turned over, trying to get comfortable. His stomach rumbled and got hungrier. The listeners were drowned out by a low roar of thunder that started near midnight. The lightning dared of Dudley's watch, which was dangling over the edge of the sofa on his fat waist. Told Harry he'd been 11 in 10 minutes' time. He lay and watched his birthday tick nearer, wondering if the Dudleys would remember at all, remembering where the letter writer was now. 5 minutes to go. Harry heard something crack outside. He hoped the roof wasn't going to fall in, although he might be warmer if it did. 4 minutes to go. Maybe the house in Private Drive would be so full of letters when they got back that he'd be able to steal one somehow. 3 minutes to go. Was that the sea slapping hard on the rock like that? And 2 minutes to go. What was the funny crunching noise? Was the rock crumble into the sea? 1 minute to go. And he'd been 11, 30 seconds, 12, 10, 9. Maybe he'd woken Dudley off just to annoy him. 3, 2, 1, boom! The whole shack shivered as Harry sat bolt upright, staring at the door. Someone was outside, knocking to come in.